Hello everyone, this is Leo from the Monkeys Making Misplaced channel, and this is step 2 of how to play Cardfight Vanguard Overdress. In today's episode, we are going to talk about building a deck. We're not really going to build a competitive deck or a very strong deck. We just want you to know what a deck should look like. Um, That'll be, what the deck size is, with the main deck, the right deck, what restrictions the deck building has in this game, so that you understand more or less what you're going to get into, right? We thought that maybe this should go before we get into like the complexities, so that you have a base knowledge of what a deck should look like. So to start it off, we're going to talk about the deck size. A standard Vanguard deck for Overdress is 50 cards, which is made of both normal units and trigger units, as well as certain decks using things like normal orders, blitz orders, or set orders. These are cards that we will look at later on. There are several start decks that are available. These are pretty cheap. They're not the strongest, but if you just want an easy start, there you go. It'll also give you the trigger units that you might need. The trigger units are generic across the entire nation, whichever one you pick. The normal units are usually not generic because they're for the strategy of the start deck, but you can get some good cards or at least a base of cards to start playing with. Then we will move on to the right deck. The right deck is 4 cards that will start outside of your main deck, right? And they guarantee you a ride up every turn in exchange for a card from your hand. This is very good because it has diversified how deck building works, because in prior iterations of the game, be that in Cardfight Vanguard V or in G, they did not have a right deck, so you had to play a certain ratio of cards to make sure that you did not miss a ride up. But in Overdress, that problem has been solved almost entirely with the right deck. The right deck has to contain a grade 0 to a grade 3. Um, there's no real restrictions on what the cards in there have to be, as long as they're a 0 to 3, right? You are allowed to play any 4 cards. Then we have the main deck. The main deck consists of 46 cards, which is made up of 16 trigger units and a combination of normal units and any types of orders your strategy may play, be that normal, set, or blitz. Right? I produced 2 different decks that or deck profiles that they are available on Decklog, which is a source we will be talking at the end of this series, where you can build your decks before you have to buy them. You can't really test them, but it'll give you a visual of what the cards you're looking at, right? Then we go into deck building restrictions. So a main deck is a total of 50 cards. Certain decks have access to a G zone. At the moment, that is only currently 2 decks, being Alter Ego Messiah and Chronojet Dragon, which has a limit of 16 cards, but currently neither of those can have more than 8 cards that can be in there, so there's no real reason to mention it. But the G zone limit is 16, although no one can get past it. A deck must contain 16 trigger units. A deck can only contain 4 copies of any card. There are certain rules about this for formats like Premium, but since we're specifically talking about Overdress, you're only allowed to play 4 copies of a card. They have to have the same name, because in the case of the Overdress mechanic and the Cross Overdress mechanic, a lot of the names of the units have Virina in them, but they're different units because it's not specifically just Virina, right? A deck can only contain 4 cards with Sentinel. These cards will also go into more down the line, but if you buy a start deck, it'll come with the 4 Sentinels you need. And then a deck can only contain 1 Regalis piece. These cards we will also go into later down the line, but usually I'll talk about them a little bit here. They're just very strong cards. They have very strong effects. For the most part, so you only get access to 1, right? They're very strong. I think at the moment of recording, there's only 3 available, and you are only allowed to play one of those 3 in your deck. You're not allowed to play 4 copies of it. You're only allowed to play 1 copy of it. Then we go into trigger units. There are some restrictions here. A deck must include a total of 16 trigger units, and out of those 16, you can only play 1 over trigger. The overtrigger has to correspond to your nation of whatever your deck is, or it has to be one of the generic Cray Elemental overtriggers. We'll go more into that at the end of this series when we're trying to explain more of the nuance of the game. But since we're just trying to get you to build a deck that you're just going to play with, you're not too invested in this, right? We don't want you to spend money if you're not going to enjoy the game, right? We want you to be able to just test out the game, just fresh. Most start decks come with a generic over trigger, so you'll have that card in case you want to use it. And then of the 16, you can only play 4 heal triggers. Heal triggers are very strong cards, so it makes sense. Another rule is that of the 16, you cannot play more than 8 of a front, draw, or critical trigger. So, as the example I presented there, you have the 1 over trigger, you have the 4 heal, you have 4 fronts, you have 4 crits, and then you have 3 draws. There is no way for you to play a total of more than 8 of any of the 3 triggers, which being draw, crit, or front. So you can only play 8 crit, you can only play 8 front, you can only play 8 draw, and the remaining 3 triggers must be either a draw or a front. Let's say you want to play 8 crit, you must choose to play 3 draw or 3 front. Let's say you want to play 8 front, you are only allowed to play 3 crits or 3 draws as the other units there. So those are the restrictions. And then for the final thing here, there is deck building exceptions. There is a deck that allows you to break the rules of deck construction, and that is Dragon Tree, specifically because of Gryphozoid. Gryphozoid allows you to have 5 cards in your right deck, which consists of itself, your Overtrigger, and 3 different Calamity cards. So instead of having the set 4 cards in your right deck, you'll start with 5. Your deck will only have 15 triggers in it, and your main deck will only have 45 cards in it because instead of having 4, you'll have 5 out of the deck. But this is the only exception currently to the rule. Dragon Tree is unique because you can play it with any nation, right? You can play any Overtrigger. It isn't, as you can see on the bottom right of the card, it doesn't have a nation, right? It can be a part of any nation. So it does break the rules in a bit, but since it in the rules specifically, it states that those rules must be followed unless a card says to break them, in this case being Gryphozoid. I decided that we should just get its own slide instead of me saying, mentioning the rules and the other, because not everyone's going to want to play Dragon Tree, so there's no reason for me to change the rules up and confuse newer players with something like that. When Dragon Tree can be its own deck, and anyone who is interested in playing it can just look at this individual site and see the differences, right? But that is all I'm going to talk about today for deck building. This should just get you a base understanding of what a deck should look like, more or less, right? They're the things you need. Everything else is pretty much up to you. There's no real, right now we're not talking about any complex stuff. This is just what should a deck look like, more or less. What can't I do? What can I do? Things like that. And that'll be all. Thank you. This is a much shorter video than the first one because in the first one I had to go over quite a few cards, but in this one I was able to breeze through it a little bit quicker. So thank you for watching, and I'll hope you catch me in the next one where I will keep going. In the next video we will be talking about the setup of the game and how to set up your board, how to start the game. Thank you for watching.